Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name's Heather and we are here with another monthly reading wrap-up. This time for the month of February. I was in the biggest reading mood this month. I read so many books. It's the shortest month of the year, but I read more books than I think I've read in a single month in so long. I don't even know when the last time was, but I read 12 books, I believe. 11, 12, yeah. I read 12 books this month, so it was crazy. We have a lot of books to talk about, so I'm gonna just dive right in. We've got a whole stack. I've got quite a few of these that were in audiobook or on the Kindle, so we'll just dive right in. We're gonna go through the books that I read in February, and then we'll talk about my TBR for March. We started off the month of February really strong with my reading pink and red cover books, and the first book I finished in February was Foul Lady Fortune by Chloe Gong. This one is a 5-star book. I'm obsessed with it. Basically, if you don't know, this is part of what's called the Secret Shanghai series. So there's 2 duologies that make up the series. The first one is These Violent Delights, Our Violent Ends. And then the second one is Foul Lady Fortune and Foul Heart Huntsman. The first duology is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet set in 1920s Shanghai. This book picks up about 4 years after the events of the first duology, and you are following a different main character. There are a couple of the characters from the first duology that pop up in this book. There's not as many as I was kind of hoping there were going to be, and I was a little nervous going into this book because I felt like this was not my favorite character from the first duology, and so I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it. But she grew on me a lot in this book, so I actually really enjoyed it. This one is very covert ops. Shanghai is now fully into civil war, and you have 2 sets of siblings which are both split across the sides of the civil war. So you've got one of each set of siblings on either side, and they are all serving as covert op agents, and so you're just following the super fun spy plot. And it leaves off on a huge cliffhanger, so I really need to continue with the second book, but that is Foul Heart Huntsman. I cannot say enough good things about this. I think it is just the perfect amount of humor mixed with a great plot. It's ever so slightly sci-fi, but it's mostly historical fiction, so I think it's just a really solid book, and I'm obsessed with it. Then the second book that I finished was actually an audiobook, and that was The Raven Boys by Maggie I'm gonna say this wrong, Stiefvater, I think. So this is part of the Raven cycle, but it is basically you're following this girl named Blue who has been told she lived, like, her whole family are psychics except for her, and she's been told her entire life that she is going to that when she kisses her true love, he will die. And so you're following her, and then you're also following these boys who go to this boarding school in her town, and they're called the Raven Boys, hence the Raven cycle, and they are on this hunt to find this, like, dead Welsh king. And so you kind of go from there. It's very much so a character-driven book. The plot's a little slow. I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. There's some really fun characters. The narrator on the audiobook is way good. There's also, like, intro and outro music that the author composed specifically for the audiobook, so that's kind of fun. I almost thought that there was going to be music all throughout, but it's not. It's just the intro and outro. But overall, a really good book. Again, the plot is stretched really long, and I actually ended up listening to the rest of the books in the series, so we'll get to those later in the video, but a good solid start. I don't know that I was, like, obsessed by the end of it, but it was still a really good book. And then I read the last book for my Red and Pink books video, and that was Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz. I think this was my least favorite book I read this month. I gave it a 3.5. It's basically, you're following this lady named Susan, who is a editor, and she is the editor for this really successful crime author. And so she gets his latest manuscript and she goes to read through it. And basically at the beginning you get this intro about where she's like, I sat down to read this manuscript. This is one that changed my life, like, for real. And then you read through the entire manuscript, and then it jumps back to her and how it changed her life. And I'll be honest, I liked the book, like the manuscript, better than I liked her story that we kind of got before and after. It also was a little rough to me where you spent like a couple hundred pages really getting to know the characters in the manuscript, and then you just kind of left them and had to get back into the characters from the very first chapter, and it was a little bit hard for me. So not my favorite. I don't know that Anthony Horowitz is really the author for me. He's got good ideas, but they're just never quite executed well. So if I didn't already say it, that was a 3.5 stars. Okay, and then the next book that I read was The Burning Bridge. This one is Ranger's Apprentice book number 2. I've been borrowing them from the Libby app and reading them on the Kindle. I gave this one 4 stars. I think it's just a good, solid kids book. It's not anything crazy special. It's a fun continuation. There's some interesting things that happen with the characters. You get a little bit of extra world building. It feels like you started the first book on like this little blob of the map, and then this book just like expands it a little bit, and I'm sure we'll get kind of expanded. It leaves on quite the cliffhanger, which I was surprised about being like a kid's book, but it's quite the cliffhanger, so I need to get back to the next book of it sometime. But overall, just a good, solid, middle grade book. And then the next one that I finished was also from Libby on the Kindle, and that is Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. I was surprised at how much I loved this book. I'd gotten a suggestion from Carrie Can Read, and she had said it was really good, but I wasn't sure if it was going to be exactly my cup of tea, and I really had no idea what the book was even super about. I knew it was a retelling of Goose Girl, which I thought was interesting because at the very beginning of the year, I read A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher, which is also a retelling of Goose Girl. And I would say that Little Thief sticks much closer to the original fairy tale than A Sorceress Comes to Call does. That one's like loosely inspired, very loosely. This one is like really a retelling. So that part was fun. I gave it a 4.5 stars. I really loved it, and currently have the other one on, like I'm in line to get it from Libby. But basically you're following, I think her name's Vanya, and she's the 13th child of a 13th child, and so her parents think she's unlucky. So they give her as to the goddesses of fortune and death as their godchild, basically. And so they raise her, and then you're following her. You're kind of jumping back and forth, learning, like you learn bits and pieces of her childhood as you go, but she has stolen the identity of a princess, and she is going around robbing people in the kingdom. And then she steals from the wrong person, a detective character shows up. It's just really fun. I don't want to spoil the plot too much, but it is super fun. The characters are really complex. There's some very fun ways that they interact with like the magic and the gods and all sorts of things. It's very almost detective story, but also fantasy, which is my favorite combo of books. And it's just so good. The ending is great. I thought the character development was done so well. It just was a really solid book. So I'm really excited to read the next one. I'm hoping I get that hold to come in soon, but that was Little Thieves. And then I went back and revisited The Raven Cycle. I was listening to it while reading all of these books, but I actually got through the next 2 books after that. The Dream Thieves is book 2. I gave that one 4 stars. I thought it was a solid continuation. I didn't love one of the characters that it kind of focused in on. It's not one of the like main characters, but there's this other kid from school that becomes a pretty big character, and I just did not like him. He was so obnoxious, and I'm really glad that he wasn't much of a character in the rest of the series. So yeah, didn't like him as much. He brought it down for me a little bit. The third book is Blue Lily, Lily Blue. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I thought of the whole series, this was the most engaging book, especially in the audiobook. There's one character that shows up in book 3 that, or maybe the end of book 2 into book 3, I can't remember, but she like sings 80% of what she says. Like she just makes up songs, and I thought the audiobook narrator did such a good job with it. I was really impressed. Honestly, that kind of made it for me, but the audiobook narrator was just so good. I don't think I've been that thoroughly impressed with a narrator in a while, so really highly recommend the audiobooks if you're going to do The Raven Cycle. And then the next book that I finished was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This one I read because I'd seen a lot of people saying that you should read it in winter because it's a very wintry book. I don't understand why. It's like cold and rainy most of the time, I felt like. So it wasn't really like snowy. I don't know. not sure that I feel like you necessarily need to read it in the winter, but that's what a lot of people say. But basically this book is about this circus that just shows up out of nowhere in the middle of the night, and then it's just super magical, and you're following these two magicians who have been trained specifically for this competition by their two mentors, teachers, whatever you want to call them, just so they could compete in this very high stakes competition surrounding the circus. It is not the most fast-paced plot book ever. It is definitely more of a character study. It's almost a romance, but it's also fantasy. So I don't know. I don't know if I quite expected it to be like this, but it was good. I gave it 4 stars. You'll notice I gave a lot of books 4 stars this month, but a lot of them were just really solid books, just not like new favorites. The writing on this is very lyrical, very descriptive. She's much more like setting the vibe than necessarily explaining to you what's happening. So I don't know. It was good. I don't know if I'm as obsessed with it as everybody is, but I'd say it doesn't necessarily fall super short of the hype. I think the hype is warranted. It's just maybe not the perfect book for me. I definitely would read more from this author though. Okay, and then we had one of my favorite reads of the month. This is Last Violent Call. This is the novellas that you read in the Secrets to Shanghai series after Foul Lady Fortune. And this one ties back in some of the characters from the first duology to then meet up with what's going on in Foul Lady Fortune, so that then in the final book they can all kind of come together. One thing I do think, a lot of people say you can read Foul Lady Fortune without reading the original duology, and I just don't agree, primarily because I can see kind of where we're going, and it feels like they're going to tie in so much. There's also so many references in Foul Lady Fortune to the events of the first duology, so I think you need to read both. The first duology is so good, why would you not? But this is actually made up of 2 different novellas, and first of all, these books are beautiful. They're totally illustrated, but they're little novellas following 2 different sets of characters from the first duology. And this one is very intertwined with what was happening in Foul Lady Fortune. It is very much so like we're catching back up to tie into the end of Foul Lady Fortune. It is explaining how some characters got from the first duology to what is now happening in the second duology. I don't want to say a ton because I feel like it's spoilers for the first duology. Really, I don't know if there's much more I can say without spoiling things, but it's very much so just a little slice of life of how they're dealing with the aftermath of what happened in the first duology and kind of what they're doing with their lives now. They have some people show up that need their help and they go to help them. And then this one is the second novella. This one's This Foul Murder. The first one was called A Foul Thing, but this one is following 2 other characters that are in very different circumstances, and this one was so fun because it's basically like a Murder on the Orient Express type of a book, just with these characters where they are on a train going from one place to another to accomplish something, but then somebody dies on the train, and so they basically take up being the detectives to try and solve this murder, and it was so fun. I love a murder mystery, especially a closed door murder mystery where you have very limited number of suspects. It was so good. So to revisit some fun characters and also get to see them in totally different settings in just like a fun little snapshot plot was so good. So 5 stars. I loved it. And then I went and finished the final Raven Cycle book, The Raven King. I gave this one 4 stars. Again, I think this was a solid series. It just isn't necessarily a new favorite. The plot is very, very slow. It is basically one plot across all 4 books. So it's very dragged out, but I just feel like it was a little anticlimactic in the ending because, again, it's very much so just about the character development. This is not a plot book. And so if you're in it for the plot, it's very anticlimactic at the end. If you're in it for the character development, I think there's more to that. But I was a little bit like, oh, that's it? Like, that's where we're ending it? There was a lot of build-up because you had 4 books worth of build-up. It's not like they had kind of a whole arc within each book. It was one big arc, and so It just felt like a lot of build-up for a little bit of an underwhelming ending, but overall it was still a really good book. And then I had been reading a ton of fantasy and books like that, so I decided to switch it up a little bit, and I picked up 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. This is the same author as Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This one is basically about this group of friends that are on this road trip in an RV when they break down in the middle of nowhere and realize that there is a sniper shooting at them because he wants to get a secret from them. And so they're trapped in this RV with each other trying to root out who has the secret that the sniper wants. I gave this one 4 stars. I don't know if that's exactly how I feel about it. It might be slightly lower than that. It was a very bingeable book. I started it in like the evening and I finished it the next morning. So I read it super fast. I thought it was a little predictable, not in like the details, but within the first few chapters, I was like, okay, I know what one of the big reveals is going to be. It's going to be about this. And I was right. I didn't have the details, but I knew we were going to have a reveal about this certain piece of information. And so to a certain extent, it was a little predictable. There were some plot twists that got me. It was definitely one of those things where it was like, I don't like this character, so I know it can't be them, so it's probably this other somebody else. I will say I have a really hard time with Holly Jackson's books being classified as YA. I feel like there are a lot of really strong language and sometimes some really heavy adult topics. This one's not as bad as I feel like Good Girl's Guide to Murder gets, but there's still some heavy topics. So I don't know. I feel like in my mind, categories for like the age categories for books should be similar to like ratings for movies, which I know it's not like that. Definitely not anymore. I feel like it used to be sort of, but I feel like if you were to make this a movie, it would be R. So it feels a little funny for it to be in the YA section. Purely language alone. Like I think you'd have to edit 80% of the dialogue if you were going to make this not an R-rated movie. I also feel like Holly Jackson just doesn't write endings that I like. I didn't like the ending of the last book of Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I didn't like the ending of this book. They're very open-ended. Like she wraps up the main things that have to be wrapped up. You get the solution, but she writes very character-driven thrillers. And then you don't get an ending that shows you how it affects the characters or how they deal with it. And so you just get like, here's the information, and then it's never like, oh, but here's how it affected the characters, which normally isn't an issue. Like in normal like mystery thriller books, the detective brings them all in, you have this chat, and then that's kind of the end of the book. But where this one is so character driven, you really kind of want to see, or at least I do, I want to see how that affects the characters and how they move on from that, and I don't feel like she fully gives me that. So I feel like I always end up just a little unsatisfied with the ending of her books. So I don't know if I'll be continuing to read her stuff. Like they're fine, but I feel like there's better thriller mysteries out there for me personally. So I don't know if I'm going to continue with Holly Jackson's work. And then the final book that I read in February was City of Ashes by Cassandra Clare. These covers are the worst. I hate them, but the spines are cool. So, but this is book 2 in the Mortal Instruments series, which is part of the Shadowhunters universe. This one was an interesting one. I think I'm gonna give it 3.75 stars is what I've settled on, which is really picky, but I just am having a hard time of where to put it. Super bingeable. Again, I read it in probably less than 24 hours, for sure less than 48. It's a little bit hard to talk about this one. Basically, you're just picking up right about where this first book left off, and you're just continuing. This whole world is like a modern, I think it's called an urban fantasy, where you're in like modern day New York. And you're following this girl who thought she was just totally normal, and then all of a sudden she starts seeing things and she finds out there's this whole world of demons and angels and vampires and werewolves and fairies and stuff. So you're just kind of following her with some of the things that she's dealing with. A lot of people have talked about this online, but there is a bit of a weird incest-esque thing where you have 2 siblings that kind of fall in love. And I feel like reading the first book, I was like, okay, I don't get why everybody's so up in arms about this. Like, they have no idea they're siblings, they've never met each other before, and it's not until the very end of the book that they find out. I see why people have an issue with it now. It is much more of a thing in this book. Like, why could we not just move on? So my theory is that either they're not going to actually be siblings, because that's the only thing that makes sense. Like, why would you continue down this storyline if you weren't going to come back and be like, oh, they're actually not siblings. That was incorrect information. I don't know. I'm just like, it feels weird. Like, why couldn't you let them just move on and deal with it instead of being like, no, they're still in love with each other, but they can't. It's a little odd. So, I don't know. I'm interested to see where the rest of the series goes. I see why people say it's weird now. The first book wasn't that bad. The second book is much more so like, why are we continuing to do this and not just letting everyone move on? So there are some crazy plot twists. I did not expect some of the things that were going to happen with some of these characters. I'm definitely going to continue. These are not like the most amazing books I've ever read. But they're very nostalgic, early 2010s YA fantasy, which I think is when they were really popular. I never saw them when I was in middle school, but apparently that was when they were big. So my husband was like, yeah, everybody read those in middle school. And I was like, I don't think I've ever heard of these books until I started watching BookTube. So that's my thoughts on that one. I'm gonna continue. I would love some advice. I know to read the third book next, but then I've seen that you take a break and read some of the other books and then come back to the last 3 in this series. Please advise if you think that's not the route to do, because that's what my plan is at the moment. But those are all the books that I read in February. Like I said, I had quite the reading month. It was a lot, but we're gonna move on to my March TBR now. I have quite a few books that I want to read in March. Not a lot of them are ones that I actually own physically yet. But the first one is one that I actually started this morning, so I've already gone a little ways into it, and that is Black Powder War by Naomi Novik. This is book 3 in the Temeraire series, which I am loving so far. This is basically, imagine the Napoleonic Wars but with dragons. And that's what this book is. So the dragons are so fun. They're used in such a unique way. They have the biggest personalities. People characters are really cool too, but the dragons just like make it. So if you want a dragon book that is not a romantasy, try this series. I am not a romance person, if you couldn't tell. I don't love the romances in books, and so I feel like a lot of dragon books lately have been very romantasy, and I just don't want to read that. I want to read true dragon books, and this is a series that is so focused on the dragons. They are main characters. It's really just hitting the spot for the child dragon fan in me, but very war book. There's like, that is the plot, is we are in a war and we are following this war. I just am obsessed with it. I can't wait to continue this series. I thought the first 2 books were so good. This is the only series I've read by Naomi Novik so far, so I know this isn't her most popular. I haven't even really seen this one talked about online very much, but I'm obsessed with it. If you want a good dragon book, pick up the Temeraire series. And then the next book on my March TBR is A Hero for Wendla. This is book 2 in the Wendla series. I'm rereading them. These were some of my favorite books as a kid, and I've been wanting to do a reread for a while. So I reread book 1 in January, so I figured I should probably get going on the second one before I space these out too much. But these are by Tony DiTerlizzi, and it's very much so a middle grade sci-fi series with lots of aliens and cool creatures and the best illustrations. Let me find you one. But the whole book has just tons of illustrations done by the author. So I love this series with my whole heart. I'm so excited to continue through this. And yeah, that's my next one. And then I have a couple of books that are for a specific video that I'm going to be doing in March. So I won't go too in depth on these because you'll be seeing a lot about them in a little bit. But the first one is The Palace Walk, or just Palace Walk. Palace Walk. I'm not going to try and say that name. I need to look up before I film that video how to say the name of this author, but this is book 1 of like a saga of like a family. It's a pretty hefty book, so I'm a little nervous about it. It's called the Cairo Trilogy is what this one's a part of, but it is kind of a big book, but I'm interested to read this one. I've heard this one's kind of like a classic, so intrigued. I think it's probably a good idea to have some books, take a break from reading so much YA fantasy for a minute, so this one will be a nice break. And then the next one is People Like Them by Samira Sadira, something like that. And this one is set in the French Alps. It's kind of a mystery book, so I'm really excited about it, and it seems like a good wintry one before we fully lose all of our snow. It's felt very much like spring here, so I might have missed my window on a wintry vibe for this book, but I'm very excited for this one. And then the rest of the books on my TBR I do not actually own physically yet. So the last one for that same video is called The Other Americans. I can't remember the author name, but I'll put the cover up here. And that's the last one for that video. Honestly, I can't remember what this book is about, so it's been a while since I've looked that up, but that's the other one for that video. And then I've talked a lot about the Secret Shanghai series, but I do want to read Falheart Huntsman this month. I think we're going to Barnes & Noble tonight, so I will probably be buying this one so that I can read it. But I'm really excited to see how the series ends. I'm excited to see all my favorite characters back together again. It's gonna be so good. This one's not like officially on my TBR, but I'm very, very hopeful that I will get Painted Devils from the library this month. That's the second book to Little Thieves, so I'm really hoping that this one comes through. I'm like second in line, but I've been second in line for so long, it feels like, so I'm really hoping that that one comes through soon, so that I can read that one this month. And then the third book in that trilogy comes out at the very end of March, so hopefully my library actually gets a copy of it and I can get that third book, but I'm excited for that one. And then the last one, I have one audiobook on my list, and that is The Ghosts of Greenglass House. This is book 2 in the series. I listened to the Greenglass House, the first book, in like December. This one's a middle grade book about this kid who, with his parents, they live in this smuggler's inn that his parents run, and they're kind of like mystery books. So it's like this little kid solving mysteries. They're fun, the narrator's good, very quirky characters, so it'll be fun. But that's all of my TBR for March. There are 8 books, so it'll be a lot of reading, but hopefully my big reading mood just continues into March. So it's my birthday month, I'm excited. It's starting to warm up here in Idaho. I'm sure it's fall, spring, and it's gonna snow again, but for right now we're enjoying the nicer weather. So anyways, all that being said, this video was crazy long because I had a lot of books to get through, so thank you so much if you made it to this point. If you've got any book recommendations for me, or if you've read any of these books and want to chat, please let me know down below. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one very soon. Bye.